Hi everybody. I just got finished playing the next 1,000 hands for the diary, and I gotta say it was a bit of a swingy few sessions. I played 4 sessions as you can see, and in the beginning we were crushing it. You know, we made huge profits, and then it just kind of went downhill. We even crossed the zero mark here, went below. We were losing, and we just shot straight back up to make a profit of just under one buy-in over that next 1,000 hands. So, as always, let's just see what happened. I'd like to go through this hand first because it's fairly unlike the other hands that I've reviewed in the past in that I'm actually bluffing here and losing. So let's just see how it happened. Someone opens, we get 2 callers, and I'm in a small blind with ace queen offsuit, and I think this is a pretty standard squeeze. In hindsight, I think I'd like to make this a little larger, like 42 cents. Just add that extra raise size, add the extra 6 cents on there because it makes it a bit too easy, in my opinion, for the opponents to call. Anyway, in reality, I made it 36. The big blinds folds, and the first 2 opponents fold. But this guy, who's showing fairly nitty stats, like fairly tight aggressive stats, makes the call. We're going to jack high board, and because we 3-bet, we've got a very tight and strong range, whereas he also has a tight and strong range, but it's fairly capped, and we are not. As in, we have aces, kings, queens, and he just cannot have them because he didn't 3-bet. So we still have the range advantage, and I think we should bet 1/3 pot, which is what we do, and he makes the call. The turn is a blank, and here I've got to decide if I want to shove or check because he's got 137 left. No other bet size makes sense other than shoving. So the hands I'd want to shove for value would be aces, kings, queens, jacks, eights, and ace jack, I think. Yeah. The hands I'd want to bluff with are hands that have flush draws. If I ever had like 10-9 of spades here, that would be a pretty obvious shove, right? So any flush draw should be shoving as well. And I think hands that block top pair combinations should be premier bluff candidates as well. If you look at my hand, I've got ace jack and queen jack both blocked, and both ace jack and queen jack suited are hands that this opponent is likely to have, especially with the queen of diamonds, because the queen of diamonds means he can't have queen jack of diamonds. So he's only got 2 combinations of queen jack suited left. The thing that's bad about this hand to bluff with is that I have the ace of spades, which means he can't have the nut flush. And if he can't have the nut flush, then he's more pair heavy. However, I think that the fact that I block ace jack and queen jack suited is more relevant, and I think that makes it a pretty good bluff candidate. So we do bluff, and I remember this hand. In reality, he tanked down to his last second and then made the call with queen jack of hearts, which is completely fine by him. Like, he's got a pure bluff catcher, but if you're against a completely balanced opponent, he would have to call sometimes, and I think you have to call all the time actually. And this time I was bluffing, and he made the right call, and we end up losing exactly $2, right, from the start of the hand. 343 down to 143. Yeah, we just lost a buy in there, but I think the way I played that hand is completely fine. Okay, let's have a look at some other hands that may be a bit more standard. We open king queen of spades, and we get a call and then a small 3-bet. He's got like reggy stats, but the fact that he 3-bet this small out of position is kind of telling that he's going to be a bad reg at the most. So we make the call. There's no reason to 4-bet bluff. We're getting pretty good odds. We just call. Go 3-way to a flop that's queen high with 2 spades. It's pretty good for us, and we face a 3rd pot bet. Now, because we're multi-way, this betting range should be stronger. I don't know if it is in reality or if it's not, or whatever, but in theory it should be. And because I don't really have any reads on how they play post flop too much, then I just go with normal tendencies. This hand is a pretty good candidate to just call and play a lot of turns because we obviously have a lot of equity. So I call, and this guy calls as well. So I should be fairly careful going forward. 4 of clubs on the turn, and our opponent checks. Now, we've got 197 left. The pot's 127. We've really got to decide if we want to bet or just check. And it's kind of interesting because, like, this guy, when he checks the turn, has a fairly weakish range, but this guy is still... he can still be quite strong. He can still have ace-queen, and there are a lot of combinations of ace-queen offsuit. He could have king-queen, queen-jack, he could have flush draws, but I block all the flush draws. And he could have, like... because he called the flop, his range should be fairly tight. So because of this, I think playing cautiously and checking is fine, and I also think betting is fine. It doesn't really matter which one you pick, but knowing that when you check, you're slightly under-repping your hand, and when you're betting, then, you know, you've got a fairly normal hand to proceed with anyway. In any case, I check, face a third pot bet, and a call. So now it's a really interesting spot, and I think even looking at it in hindsight, I'm still not sure what the correct option is really to do. I mean, calling is fine, I suppose, because we leave ourselves with 156 into a pot of like 250. So we'd have fairly easy decisions on rivers. But shoving here could be quite interesting as well, because we're risking 197 to win 209. And obviously we have a lot of equity. As you can see, actually, PokerTracker says we only need 16% odds here. And we obviously have way more than that with our specific hand against pretty much any hand. The big advantage in my mind about jamming is that one person is likely to fold. Instead of going 3-way to the river, we can just go 2-way to the river without equity. Or in the rare case that both people fold, we take it down without showdown, which is obviously really good. Yeah, I'm still not sure because multi-way spots are really hard to analyze without seeing like both people's ranges, and you can never know what both people's ranges are in reality. So I think both calling and jamming here are fine as long as you're not folding. You know, you're pretty much good. In reality, I decided that jamming was slightly better, but like honestly, who's gonna know, right? It's really hard to tell. Anyway, I jam. This guy folds, which I find extremely surprising. I was sure he was going to have a made hand that was willing to call off. And this guy calls off with pocket jacks. This is horrible. He played this absolutely horrible. I don't mind his flop bet, but like the check call on the turn is disastrous. And then this, obviously, this is just punting. Calling my jam with jacks here is just so losing. So we're actually 98% to win, which is, you know, it's just I would never have expected myself to be a 98% favourite once he calls. But anyway, that is what happens. So we win a huge pot there, 528. That's good for 2.5 buy-ins. On to the next one. Okay, this hand. We open ace-10 suited, get a call, and we get squeezed. We're just going to call here. There's no other real play for me in my mind. So we call, and this guy folds. Place a monotone flop where we flop 2 pair. And we face a half pot c-bet. So we obviously have to be careful on turns and rivers. But for now, nothing but a call. Turn the ace, so we turn the nuts, which is incredibly good. And the opponent bets 2/3 pot. This is kind of interesting because if I go all in here, I'd be risking 185 to win 236, so I probably should be doing this a lot of the time. But because it's monotone and paired, there's really not a lot of hands that I would be doing this with without a full house. Like King Queen of Hearts might want to jam, but the problem with King Queen of Hearts is that Svarog could just have is never going to have a flush draw himself. So he's got trips, which, I mean, to be fair, might just call anyway, because at these stakes he might just call, but even though he shouldn't. And he doesn't have any flush draws to 5 King Queen of Hearts. So this is actually kind of one of those spots where, because it's monotone and paired, I actually prefer a call here rather than a jam. Even though on most other boards I would prefer jamming with this stack size of 185 into a pot of 236. There's also the slightly exploitative play of just calling and seeing a river. Because we're in position, we can always put the money in on the river no matter what happens. And if we jam here on the turn, we might get him to fold some bluffs. So we call. 8's really interesting because now if he has any ace-x, he's just going to stack off, and we beat ace-x, right? He just jams himself though, makes our decision really easy. We've got pretty much the nuts. And he had ace-queen with the Queen of Hearts, so, you know, he played it fine, kind of unlucky, because on the flop he's actually like almost flipping with our hand. But yeah, on this turn he just kept betting, and on the river he must have thought he was going to get value from a flush, I guess, and just went for it. So luckily for us, we win that $5 pot. And finally, we last hand to really look at getting open. We have kings in the small blind. We make it 4.5x. Guy calls, and we get a jack high flop. Because we 3-bet out of position, we've got the stronger range, so we should continue a third pot, which we do. He calls, and we get a jack turn. That's pretty bad. On most turns in 3-bet pots, I would use kings as like a check raise to protect my checking range, and to allow myself to have check raises in these 3-bet pots. But like on the jack turn, it's just so bad because all of his top pairs become trips and now beat us. So I check with the intention of calling a reasonably sized bet. He makes it 2/3, which is pretty much on the cusp of what's comfortable for me, so I just make the call. Fortunately for us, we get the king river, and I considered donk jamming for a little while, but it doesn't really make sense with any hand apart from kings, so we should just check to protect the entire range. He makes ahead and bets a half pot here, and there's nothing else to do but to jam. We jam, and he actually just folds. I think he snap folded in real time, so he must have been bluffing. But it's kind of interesting because, like, he would have had to float us on the flop, and then bluff the turn and then bluff the river, which you don't really see a lot in 3-bet pots. I'm not going to lie, you don't really see a lot of like floats then bluffs. But yeah, something to keep in mind for this guy. So we take down that pot. Okay, if I just draw your attention to the sessions that I played and the stats, as you can see, we played just over 1,000 hands, which is fine. But funnily enough, I added the standard deviation stat here to the mix, and it's kind of funny. I'm averaging a really large standard deviation of 350 big blinds per 100. For context, at my when I played higher stakes, or like high stakes, where when I played like 25NL, you know, not really high stakes, but higher than this. When I played 10NL, 25NL, my standard deviation would be like 75 big blinds per 100. So a fairly variance-free kind of style of poker. But because I'm playing at 2NL, a lot of people like to get it in a lot. So I find myself in a lot of all-in spots. So my standard deviation is just absolutely huge. And because the standard deviation is so large, the actual result, the final result of winning 176 has so much variance. Like, it's just not even a thing. Like, I could be up loads, I could be down loads. Like, it's just whatever, you know. Short-term results don't really matter in the short term. If I add on the last 1,000 hands onto the rest of the 2NL challenge, or the online poker diary so far, this is where we're at. So we started around here, right? Played 1,000 hands and made a little bit. Overall, we are still looking pretty good. We're starting to peter out a bit here as the play gets a bit normalized. Well, as my results become a bit normal, because as I said in the previous video, having a big blind, having a win rate of like 25 big blinds per 100 is a bit absurd. So this kind of like almost break even kind of stretch here would normalize my big blind per 100 win rate to make it more normal. Currently winning at 17.33, which is still quite large, and no doubt I'll probably see it decrease a little bit to a more normal win rate the more hands I play. Do I have anything else to say? Not really. Oh, the other thing is that the rake I'm attributing, I'm paying 650 in rake since the start, and on PokerStars I think I've got 200. I think I've got 647. They call it points that go towards chess, so I think it is just 1 cent per. If you pay 1 cent in rake, you get 1 point. So just something to keep in mind. If I ever get rake back, I will add it to my results, because Poker Tracker obviously only tracks your actual poker playing, but for the purposes of my bankroll, any bonuses that I get will go towards this as well. Alright, I think that's all I need to say. That's all I want to say, so onwards until the next 1,000 hands, until like 5,600 or whatever. I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.